Hello, and welcome to Private Ocean's webinar in partnership with the Buck Institute, Understanding Why Aging Causes Disease, including COVID-19. I'm Greg Friedman, founder and CEO of Private Ocean. Joining me today is Dr. Gordon Lithgow, professor and vice president for the Buck Institute. Dr. Lithgow is a native of Scotland, which you will pick up immediately, and established his lab studying the biology of aging at the University of Manchester, England, before joining the Buck in 2000. Among many recognitions for his research, his most recent is the 2019 Denham-Harman Award winner, an award made by the American Aging Association for significant contributions to aging research. In Dr. Lithgow's presentation today, he's going to explain why aging research is important in understanding how to combat COVID-19, as well as how his own research can help lead the way to possible breakthrough treatments. My personal experience with aging is we're all doing it, so I think it's pretty exciting. For those of you unfamiliar with the Buck Institute, they are the world's first biomedical research institution devoted solely to research on aging, and a longtime partner of Private Ocean, and we are also a longtime supporter. The format for today is Dr. Lithgow will provide some comments, after which I will be asking some of the top questions that they have been fielding recently, as well as a few from our own clients. And with that, welcome, Dr. Lithgow.
Thank you very much, Greg, for that very kind introduction. It's a great pleasure to be with Private Ocean this morning or today. And yeah, I'm going to talk about the Buck and about aging and of course talk about COVID-19 and the current environment. I've been studying aging, as Greg said, for going on 30 years now, and to be honest, I hadn't really thought much about pandemics and the risk there. I was trained as a microbiologist, so I always knew that this was coming, but the influence on aging in this is truly remarkable, and it's something that at the Buck we're all thinking about and focused about and talking about just about all the time at the moment. So aging, the connection between aging and COVID-19 is really shown in this next slide. This is data from the early days of the epidemic in China, and it shows age classes down the left-hand side of the graph here. And we know that there's been terrible, tragic incidences of infants succumbing to the disease, and certainly some children become infected and have symptoms. But for the most part, the serious symptoms and the deaths are very much age-related. And so as we get past 40 years of age here into the 50s, we see an increase, and then a massive increase in the over 70s and the over 80s. So the worst aspects of this disease in terms of severity and in terms of death are age-related. And that really intrigues us because we've been studying age-related disease for the last 20 years at the Buck Institute. And this graph here could be a graph that we could show for many diseases, cardiovascular disease, bone health, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's. All of these diseases have an aging component. Very, very few people in their early 40s or so suffer from Alzheimer's disease, but very, very many in their 80s and onwards do so. So this is a picture that shows up again. So let's just have a quick look at COVID. And this is coronavirus is a picture that we're all familiar with now from the CDC. And I just want to say a few basic things about the virus. I think we're all very knowledgeable now and going back and thinking about our high school biology and viruses and the immune system and so on. So just a quick couple of comments. So what we've got here is a ball. It's a very small ball. It's about 100 times smaller than a bacterium. And the red blobs here are proteins, and they're sticking out, and those are the proteins that bind to human cells in order for the virus to infect. But what's really interesting here, and I think about this a lot, is the white stuff or the grey stuff there. That's fat. And just like your greasy frying pan in the morning after making some bacon, when you put that frying pan into some water and some soap, some detergent, the fat just dissolves. And that's we're very, very lucky in it. This is a virus that's easy to kill outside of the body. Simple soap will pop these particles and destroy them. And I actually like to think when I'm washing my hands about hearing all the thousands of little pops going on as all the little viral particles are destroyed. So seeing this picture, I think thinking about this picture and thinking about that white fat is a good visualization to just encourage you to wash your hands and wash down with ethanol solution and so on, which also pops the virus. This is a complicated slide, and I'm not going to go into all the details here, but there's a couple of general things I want to say. So here's our virus on the outside again. The blue material is the genetic material, the genes of the virus. And for the virus to replicate, the virus to make more virus, it can't do it itself. It needs human cells. And what happens is the virus binds to the outside of the cell, is taken into the cell, and from that point, the cell is hijacked. The virus starts accumulating bits and pieces of equipment that's already in that cell doing normal things, normal healthy things for us. It accumulates those and starts to use those to make its own replication happen. And so the virus makes new proteins, viral proteins. It uses human machinery that's in there for positive purposes normally to make new replicants of itself. And so it spreads throughout the lungs. So let's get on to aging. What is aging? Aging is really mysterious and very complicated, we think. We have a good insight now after 20 years of research about how we can control aspects of aging, how we can intervene in aging. But simple questions about aging we still don't understand, like why is it that we live longer than our pet dogs? Why is it that small dogs live longer than large dogs? Why is it that we don't live as long as other animals like Arctic sharks that live 300 years, or again, the Arctic clams that live for over 500 years, which is truly astonishing if you think about that in biological time. Clams are amazing because they have beating hearts. And so think about the fact that there are hearts beating on Earth right now at the time that they were beating back when the Mayflower crossed the Atlantic. If we wanted to ask the founding fathers what they meant by certain parts of the Constitution, we could just call them up and ask them, get them on a late show. 500 years is an incredible length of time for an animal to live, but we don't know why. If we did know why, it'd be interesting, because that beating heart, 500 years, human hearts don't do that. Many human hearts, as you know, give out in their 70s and 80s. So there are secrets in some of the long-lived animals in the world, and it'd be great to know how they pull off those incredible lifespans. What we do know, though, is that aging is associated with disease. And here you have aging in the middle of a constellation of different conditions that affect different tissues, affect us in different ways. They present with different symptoms. Heart attack, macular degeneration in the eye, cancer, of course, Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, all very different diseases. Cancer is a disease of proliferation. Alzheimer's is a disease of cell death. But we've come to believe, and this is based on data that we see in the laboratories at the Buck, for example, that actually aging is a common cause of all of these conditions. A cause, and I'm using that word very specifically, that aging causes Alzheimer's disease, that aging causes heart conditions. So this worldview we've come to through studying aging in different model organisms in the laboratory, and as you'll see, and also intervening in aging. And so when we intervene in aging in the laboratory, we can see protection against very different conditions. We see protection across the board. And going back to COVID now, we think that obviously this parts of the COVID situation is caused by a virus, but the severe symptoms that the elderly are suffering from is caused by aging. And it would be really, really important to understand that relationship going forward. Just a few words about the Buck. As Greg said, we're the first freestanding institute in the world focused solely on the biology of aging. And there was something behind that actually that's important, and that is that different kinds of people came to the Buck Institute, different kinds of scientists. And so we had people studying cancer and we had people studying neurodegeneration in the same building, in these laboratories here adjacent to each other. And that was a very special thing to happen because it meant they were talking to each other. And I myself was simply interested in lifespan and trying to understand aging as a biological mystery. I hadn't really thought about human disease before. And now I'm having these conversations with scientists who have devoted their life to studying particular diseases. And the view of aging as a common cause really came from these conversations that were happening in this building in Northern Marin. And if you haven't been, hopefully we'll get you there and invite you very, very soon. So there's over 200 employees on site at the moment. We're expanding, we're in growth phase. And remarkably, we're from 30 different countries. And that's really the power of leadership in this area, that if you're born in Iran, as my PhD has been, if you're growing up in Africa, as two of our other PhD students did, and you're interested in aging, well, you find the Buck Institute very quickly, and it's apparent that we're a leading organization in this area. So our mission is really to end the threat of age-related disease for this and future generations. And it comes from bringing together a range of scientists from different disciplines. And I'll say again that, you know, when I got interested in aging, I really wasn't interested in disease. And it took a while. It took all these different conversations with different people to realize that aging was the common factor. And the more we studied the deep molecular mechanisms of aging, the more we realized there was a commonality between different disease states and the aging processes themselves. So the general goal here is represented by this couple of graphs, and what you've got here is the percent of function, and, you know, in other words, healthy function remaining throughout life. And you can see here for heart, muscular, neuromuscular, brain function, metabolic function, there's a steady decline in these functions going from 30 years of age here out to 90. This is the general picture, and this is, you know, even though exercise is incredible and it's the best medicine there is and will help this enormously, there is a steady decline in function going on in everyone. Our goal is to do this, is to push these curves towards the right, and so that we're staying healthier for longer. And I am amazed I'm saying this, actually. I'm a pretty conservative scientist, but what we're seeing in the laboratory now suggests that this is entirely possible. We can do this in worms, flies, even mice, mammal. This is important. And now we're seriously wondering why we should not be trying to do this in humans, and what benefits that would bring, not just socially, but economically as well. So a quick word about the Buck's response to COVID-19. As I said at the beginning, suddenly all of us interested in aging realized we were dealing with a new age-related condition here, a dramatic one that was affecting everyone's lives. And some of the responses are direct, and we're very proud that Dr. John Newman is on our faculty. John is also a geriatrician at UCSF, and he's been in the front lines of this effort. And, you know, we've all been learning from John a great deal about human aging and about patient care in this situation. But we're also interested in what's going on with the immune system, because again, the worst symptoms and presentations of this disease appear as a storm, a so-called cytokine storm, which is an overreaction of the immune system to the presence of the virus. And a quick look back to our high school immunology here. There's two types of immune system in humans. We have our acquired immunity. This is where we produce antibodies to recognize viruses and bacteria and so on before killing them. But there's also the innate immunity, and this is the response that happens very quickly. You know, if, for example, if you cut your hand like I did the other day, you have a reddening appearing around it over the next few hours, and that's immune cells rushing to the site of damage to try and kill whatever's trying to get in. And the innate immunity has an aging connection as well, because during aging, there's a general increase in our inflammation. And inflammation, of course, is the response of the immune system. So this is occurring in the background anyway, and there's a process that we study at the Buck called cellular senescence, where old cells accumulate during aging, and they push out cytokines, and they push out alarm signals, and these cause an increase in the inflammatory state in multiple tissues during aging. This turns out to be really important for a whole bunch of age-related conditions. But with COVID, we have this incredible reaction where the innate immune system just overloads and causes damage to human tissues, not just to the viruses. And we have three scientists at the Buck who are very interested in this. Dan Weiner is an MD, David Furman in the middle, and Eric Verden, who's also an MD or CEO. And they're asking questions about the innate immune system right now. In particular, is there an imbalance in immune response in aged patients? And we certainly believe there is. And then a related question is that the chronic inflammation that accumulates during normal aging, does that set things up for the strong innate immune response that we see during the infection? So they are hard at work. Obviously, their research is deemed essential right now, and they are in their labs and doing research that's directly aimed at combating this condition. And just a word about the resources, and one of the the problems right now is information. These are listed at the Buck Institute. If you go to our website and just click on the banner at the top here, you have access to these, what we believe are very strong and reliable sources of information. And I just want to say a word about this in general. You know, obviously there's a lot of misinformation and conspiracy theories and so on. But even the best of sources right now have trouble. And part of this is because the normal process of releasing information to the public and to the world is to go through what's called peer review, where you're essentially your discoveries are vetted by scientists trained in the area that you're publishing in. And so most of the newspaper articles you read about scientific discoveries have gone through this process, and the journalists at the end are dealing with information that has been vetted in this way. Right now, that's not happening for COVID, and partly because, and this is a good thing, scientists are just releasing their information onto the web on open sites. And so public papers are being published, and these could be really important papers, but they're being published without the vetting step. And so journalists are seeing these papers, they're grabbing them, they're writing articles about them, and they're going into the newspapers, and that's okay, but when we're reading them, we need to think, has this discovery really been validated by any other scientists? Many of the studies are quite small, you know, so you'll hear of clinical trials on 6 or 8 people and so on. And as valuable as that is, that's not the normal standard at which something would be reported. So it's just worth bearing in mind, and maybe telling your friends and family and so on that you want to dig a little bit deeper, and we're very happy at the Buck to try and help understand what these studies are that are being reported. So I'm going to finish with a few slides on what I normally do. What I normally talk about is aging research and the role of basic aging research and trying to understand the mysteries. I think basic research is incredibly important. It may be that it does not contribute to combating COVID-19. We know that we need a vaccine. That's really what's required. But if you think about it, a vaccine in the elderly is actually usually not as effective as a vaccine in young people. And this is one thing that's come out of basic research over the years, is that we have essentially ways to try and boost immune response to vaccine. So even for this pandemic, it's important that we try and understand why vaccinations don't work as well in the elderly. But more than that, I think it's all about the next pandemic. And the idea that aging would be such a large risk factor is something that we just should think of as unacceptable. This disease in its severity would be a lot less, and would be having a lot less social and economic effects if it wasn't for this strong effect in older people. So I'm going to talk about some work that we've been doing, and actually over the last 25 years or so, we've been studying aging in a really, really simple animal. And this is a picture of it here. It's called C. elegans, or Coelurobditis elegans. And it's a tiny little roundworm. It's a millimeter in size, and I'm delighted to show you some of these worms if you come up to the Buck. It's actually studied by hundreds of scientists around the world for different purposes, different biological happenings, but we study aging in this animal mainly because it lives for about 20 to 30 days. 20 to 30 days, tiny little animal. You can grow thousands of them at one time, and therefore you can do hundreds of experiments in a calendar year on aging. And what we've been able to do with genetics is to double the lifespan of this animal, and in fact going all the way up to 500% increases, so 5 times. So now you're getting to sort of like the difference between us and clams is the difference that we can make in this single animal with genetic changes. But we can also feed this animal drug-like molecules, and again we see improvements in lifespan, but most importantly we see improvements in health as well, and in the resistance of the animal to different kinds of diseases. And just like everyone else, as I said at the moment, we're all thinking about what our own research could bring to the debate about COVID and or future pandemics. And I just want to give one very small example here before we finish. And this is a work from Carla, Deepa, and Katie in my lab. And it was published a few years ago now. We were studying different compounds or natural products that appear to improve health in the worm. And we were looking at one natural product, vitamin D, because it seemed to improve Alzheimer's disease in C. elegans, in the worm. And we then tested it for lifespan, and this is a lifespan curve here. And so what you have is % survival of the animals. So what we're doing is we're coming into the lab, and 100 animals are all born on the same day, and then we're just following them through their life and checking to see if they're alive or dead or how healthy they are. And the black line on this graph is what normal worms do. This population is living up to about 22 days at the maximum. So as the worms begin to die off, the % survival sweeps down here. But you can see that worms that have been in the presence of a vitamin D diet, the curves all push to the right. So this is a lifespan extension. Both the mean lifespan and the maximum lifespan of these worms is being increased by providing vitamin D. And so it turns out actually that a lack of vitamin D or a deficiency in the worms is actually accelerating their aging. They're aging faster. And funnily enough, this makes some sense as well, because humans who are deficient are at risk for a number of age-related conditions such as Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, cancer, and so on. So I should say that this is not an endorsement of taking lots of vitamin D. I'm not a physician, I don't make that kind of advice, but it does suggest that deficiency itself is definitely a bad thing because there's an accelerated aging process. And going back to COVID again, and this age-related increase, there's a couple of findings of the many hundreds and thousands of papers that are being published right now that really got my attention because of our work on vitamin D. In this first publication here, it appeared that patients who were deficient and had an insufficiency were 7.6 likelier to have died than those with normal vitamin D. That's probably an unvalidated, it's one of these unvalidated studies right now, but that is an astonishingly large difference. 7.6 times greater risk of death if you're deficient in vitamin D. That really caught my attention, and everyone in the lab is thinking about what that means right now. A second paper, which was reviewing all sorts of literature, came to the conclusion overwhelmingly that there is a very possibility that that vitamin D levels are important in survival with this disease. So maybe the aging factor at play here is partly explained by the kinds of mechanisms that respond to vitamin D that are brought back up when we bring our vitamin D back up to normal, are engaging and preventing perhaps some of the worst aspects of this disease. All waits to be seen, but and the reason I'm really just mentioning this is to show you what scientists are doing right now. And Brian likes to think of us all as detectives, and right now, yeah, we know who the murderer is, it's the virus, and we know who the casualties are, it's the over 70s, and we're just trying to put together the full case and find these factors that might be important. And I just finish here by showing you another intervention in aging, and one that we've taken through to mice. And it's just a very dramatic picture that shows what we are capable of doing right now, at least in the laboratory. So the cage on the right here shows some quite old mice. These are about, I think, about 28 months of age. And you'll notice that their coat color is not completely even. So here are some mice. This mouse here is balding and it's going gray. And in many other aspects of health, these mice are struggling. So we measured over 30 different aspects of health in these animals. And this is normal. These mice are old mice, and this is what happens. My PhD student in the lab, actually, Azar from Iran, has been doing an experiment where she fed a group of mice metabolite, and this is from about late middle-aged, it's a metabolite called AKG. It's a naturally occurring metabolite in our bodies. And you can see from this picture a dramatic difference in coat health here. So there's very little evidence of balding or even gray hair. And in the other 30 aspects of aging that we measured, not all are improved, but many are. And the lifespan of these animals is improved as well. And what's really important is it seems like, and this is something we're going to publish hopefully within the next few months, that the period of sickness at the end of life is really compressed. And that's super exciting to imagine what that would mean for human populations if you could really compress the length of time that we're sick at the end of life. So that's what we're doing. How do we get from worms to mice to people? I believe we're doing it. It's been done in many ways by talking to clinicians like John Newman and getting clinicians engaged in these interventions that we are developing. And it's also in commercial, spinning out companies, and there's a lot of commercialization of aging research right now. It's an incredibly exciting time. I've never been so excited to be in this field. Whether we contribute to prevention of the next pandemic or not, I don't know. But I think it's really, really important that we invest in the basic research that could take us there one day. So with that, I'll say thank you, and I'm delighted to answer any questions I can.
Well, Gordon, that was fantastic. I've obviously am familiar just a little bit with the research and the work the Buck is doing, and it's again, since we're all aging and we all haven't figured out how to avoid that, this is fantastic. You know, I always like to think about things. You know, I was thinking about some questions, and I was thinking about I would appreciate, or I'm going to ask it a certain way, because I always think when you talk to experts and you talk to people that know a lot more about it than someone who does wealth management for a living or, you know, does other work, what do they do when they go home, right? So knowing what they know, right, and their expertise. So you talk about what the Buck's doing in response to the COVID-19, and I obviously you're in your house, it appears.
Yeah.
What actually, I know the CDC and the counties and the states and the cities and your mother and everybody's got, this is what you have to do. You know, what are you doing and to keep yourself safe, and what should people be thinking? Because there's a lot of fear and there's a ton of misinformation.
For sure. For sure, yeah, and it's difficult for a scientist, really. I mean, we have to. I mean, fortunately, we have some skills where we can open up a scientific paper and try and see if it looks valid or not. But we may not have the expertise in that area. I know very little about immunology, for example, so it's a challenge for us all. Everyone I know, though, it thinks that what we have done in California is the right thing, and that you know it's really been borne out by the numbers, and that I visualize those little particles popping when I got the detergent or the soap on my hands, and I'm washing my hands all the time, and hopefully, you know, that's something I think. You know, all my when I was growing up, all my aunties were nurses, and they told me to wash my hands all the time, and that kind of went away for a while, and I think it's back to stay now that we're all going to be much more careful about that. One personal thing I am doing, and I've had asthma throughout most of my life, and so I'm thinking very hard about what will happen when I, you know, eventually come in contact with this virus. And so even though I try to exercise, because we know that exercise is an incredible anti-aging medicine, it's the best thing we have. I've been particularly thinking about my lungs and how to strengthen my lungs in preparation for, you know, possible battle to come. Hopefully it won't come to that though. But yeah, exercising, trying to find joy in things, and keep making sure that, and my colleagues as well, you know, we're all trying to share with each other our experiences, and we're all looking to each other and making sure each other is all right, because obviously this is incredible mental stress at the moment, and we know that psychosocial and mental stress also makes us susceptible to disease, including infection. So I think, you know, finding joy and happiness is also important as going out and getting on a bike or something.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's great. You talked about vitamin D deficiency. I think there's probably a sense of, oh, okay, I'll go take a supplement. I mean, is it that simple, or how do you think about that in your research in
Well,
terms of advice?
yeah, and you know, again, I'm not an MD, and so I don't directly give advice other than to say, you know, talk to your physician about it. But I will quote Janice Schwartz, a professor down at UCSF, and Janice studies vitamin D in the elderly, and you know, actually there's a drop off in our ability to make vitamin D as we grow older, and that's why many elderly who are not taking supplements are actually deficient, and again, that possibly leads to susceptibility to disease. And what Janice says is, you know, don't worry about getting tested. Just take 1,000 units a day. That will be harmless at that level. Now, I should say that other scientists have shown that much higher levels than that, say 10,000 units a day, is not healthy. And we actually have evidence of that ourselves in mice, especially in mice with Alzheimer's disease. That high levels may not be a good thing. So I just quote Janice, 1,000 units a day, and that probably would take care of most people's deficiencies.
Sure. Okay. Given the disproportionate impact on older adults, are you seeing that most scientists looking at COVID through an aging lens? And again, this also, the stories are confusing, right? Because they start, you know, more and more the next day you hear, oh, New York, infants, and then, oh, this is really, and I don't think that should be ignored, right? I mean, this is a
Absolutely.
serious illness, but is it still being looked at predominantly as a older person problem?
I I don't think it is. I mean, it's been looked at as an infection problem, and I mean, obviously the epidemiologists are looking out for older people as they make their calculations. But I have to say across the board that most people studying human disease don't necessarily think about aging very much. And you can go to a top flight neuroscience institute studying Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease, and you may not find any expertise in the aging process itself. Which is amazing because aging is the number one risk factor. And as I say, we believe it's a cause. So I think that COVID is much like every other human disease, that we don't think about the aging component often enough, and we don't calculate that into how we're going to intervene. I mean, there's no question with COVID, it's all about a vaccine, but hopefully that vaccine is going to be effective in older people as well.
Okay, great. One of my favorite concepts, and it was really something early as I got exposed many years ago to the buck, that just pulled me in, was the concept of Healthspan. Can you
Yeah.
can you talk a little bit about Healthspan and how that dovetails with COVID-19, but also Healthspan in general?
Sure. I mean, you know, those little worm experiments we've been doing for 20 years, we always thought about lifespan, and we always thought, well, lifespan must be a great surrogate for health. You know, if you can make something live longer, chances are it's healthier. And it's not quite as simple as that. And actually, if you think about the buck and its mission, it really is all about promoting health. It's about keeping people independent as they enter their later years. It's about finding preventions and cures to those age-related conditions. So health span is really, and you know, people have different concepts of it, but it's really the period of time where you're not turning up at your doctor, you're not making visits to the emergency room, you don't feel the dread of an emerging chronic disease in your daily life. So the period, the span of life in which we're healthy and productive, seeing that increased would be, I think, be enormously helpful. And as I say, we're seeing this in laboratory animals. We're seeing health span increasing. We're seeing the period of illness being compressed, and that's kind of shocking to me. When I got into this field, I never thought we'd be seeing something like that. But it's, I think it's vitally important. We see this as a huge opportunity, and like everything else, I think if we were healthier going into our later decades of life, we'd be more resistant to the worst aspects of COVID or any other emerging viruses.
That's great. Thanks. Um, I think just one or two more questions. What,
Sure.
again, fly on the wall, dinner table at your house. I mean, how are you digesting the enormous amounts of uh, conflicting, really, I mean, very biased information, right? So it just flip the station and you get, you know, open up, we should all be out at a beach.
Yeah.
Next station, we should all be in hazmat suits and nowhere near each other. And pretty challenging, right? I mean, for everybody.
Absolutely.
How are you digesting all that, right?
Well,
I mean,
so around our dinner table, my wife Julie Anderson, who's also on the faculty at the Buck, is a neuroscientist. So we're talking a lot of science at home, back and forward, and some of that's, you know, just our regular science. And Julie's an expert in Parkinson's disease, is really focused on finding cures for that. But yeah, I think what we have both started to do is not really watch cable news. You know, of course, listen to NPR, see what's going on. But if the person on screen is not a scientist, I am not really paying much attention. I think we have remarkable experts out there in epidemiology and virology who are making a great job of coming out in public and sharing their thoughts. Now, does every scientist agree with every aspect of the advice being given? No, I know that for a fact. There are some scientists think that we've gone overboard a little bit here in shelter, but they're in the deep minority. And
yeah.
I would say that the people that I would listen to, the scientists with expertise, are all pretty much saying the same thing, and that is we're doing the right thing right now.
So let me just follow up on that a little bit, because we recently did a webinar with a fantastic researcher who follows economics and politics and all these things. And I asked him this question, right? There's just so much bias and misinformation and all that kind of stuff. And I asked him, well, where would you advise the layperson, what sources should they be looking at to just generally get, they can stay looking at their various things, but is there
Yeah.
something that you in particular look at? So where would you tell me to look? What websites or what sources, or, is it John Hopkins, or what is it that you would look at and go, look, if it's coming out from there or these three places, this is a good place to get some information.
Yeah, Greg, I mean, we list some of what we think are important sources on the Buck website and
Oh,
encourage
that's
people to go
fantastic.
there. I mean, I think the CDC is doing a great job in marshalling the advice. That's probably would be my number one. John Hopkins is doing a great job of, keeping the numbers straight. But I think we don't need to look too far away from CDC. Now, we're all generating documents ourselves as we begin to plan to return to doing new experiments at the Buck. It's been a fascinating process of, as microbiologists and geneticists, how do we keep each other safe based on what we know? And so then we generate documents, but I would say most of what we generate is really based on what CDC is saying.
Okay, great. No, that's very helpful. Thank you. I'm going to ask you this, but you kind of have addressed it, but I love your enthusiasm. So let me just end with this one. What gets you excited about your research, right? I mean, when you get
Oh,
up in the morning and you can't wait to start diving in, what outcome, what are you looking to what's the big epiphany? What's the big
and
opportunity?
yeah, and this actually changes, throughout your career. So earlier on, when I was at the bench doing experiments with my own hands, the true excitement was the freedom to follow your curiosity about something. And then when you got a result, when you saw something like looking down a microscope, the realization that you knew something about life that no one else on planet Earth did until you tell someone was an amazing experience. And I had to leave that behind when I started more sort of management and administration of the science. But I still get super excited when someone comes to my office, one of my PhD students or postdocs, and says, "Hey, would you mind having a look at this?" And you just like, "Oh wow, what have we got here? Is this something new for the world?" And it can be a very small thing, of course, it usually is, but that's super exciting, and that sort of just excitement about curiosity about life and what's going on, especially about this mystery aging. That's kept me going for decades. But I must admit, I'm increasingly excited when I see the possibilities for how this research could impact on human health. And that's, I think, where the conversation has been for the last 3 or 4 years. It's almost like the field is at an inflection point where we're switching from being a science project into being something that we would argue is likely to have a very large factor on medicine going forward. So that's a whole different level of excitement. I'm still really happy when someone knocks on my door and says, "Hey, do you want to have a look at this?"
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, I want to thank you on behalf of Private Ocean. Thank you, Dr. Lithgow.
Thank you.
For more information, people can go to buckinstitute.org. We're privateocean.com. We want to thank you for listening. And again, thank you for your time, Dr. Lithgow.
Thank you.